longer than me, which is a big number, 20 years, and around from DrupalCon Zeket. Antje, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming to the second keynote this morning. Let me just start by saying there's a QR code because all my slides have links, and if you want to read up any of the articles that I'm referencing, you can directly click on them in the slides. As I was introduced, I have actually been doing Drupal since about 20 years, starting as a hobbyist. I mainly build websites for NGOs, environmental NGOs. I do a lot of site building, a bit of consultancy, a bit of theming, and a bit of coding, so basically a Drupal generalist. But I'm also a biologist. I'm an NGO representative at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and on their advisory board of the Biosafety Clearinghouse. And I'm a community organizer. So I come to most topics very much from a very broad range of angles. What I'm not going to be talking about is the output of AI, hallucinations, weird pictures, the quality of code, chatbots. I think John did a really amazing session this morning about that. I'm not talking about privacy issues or AI scams, and I'm not going to talk about AI in the military kill chain, but I will talk about all the externalities of AI. And I have to give a content warning that I will mention rape and torture on one of the slides, but I'm not showing any pictures of that. What I want to talk about is what are the costs of AI, who's paying for it, in what way, what are working conditions for us and others, and what does AI mean for us as an open source community? So let's start with the obvious, data centers. They might look like a building like this, but they need space, electricity, they need cooling, which is often done by water, they need a connection to the electricity grid, but they also need the infrastructure to generate all that electricity. They need the fossil fuels to run them, or the uranium mines if you want to run them on nuclear power stations. They need the nuclear waste storage. They need water for cooling. And of course, they need the resources to build all the computers that go into the data center. So the mines for nickel, for lithium, for rare earths, the clean water for the chip factories, the helium for chip production, and I'll come back to that later. All of that is actually creating issues for climate change and environmental destruction. So that's something that we all pay for, no matter whether we use AI or not. And it's good to remember that when we talk about data centers and hyperscalers, that's on a completely different scale of data centers than what we had a few years ago. It's not just like a computer or a colo somewhere where you also need some nickel or so. The energy use is generally compared to cities and countries. I don't give you any figures because I tend to forget them while I'm listening to them, but as I said, I've got some sources for that, and you can read up on that. So energy use is quite often compared to a size of a city or a small country. Greenhouse gas emissions are often compared to airports. And just one example here, the Elsham data center in the UK is estimated to have as much greenhouse gas emissions as 5 international airports, including takeoff and landing. So rather than any specific numbers, you just have to remember that the increase in data and resource use is it's a stratospheric increase. Next, Netflix used to be the biggest customer of Amazon Web Services, and now they're just a small part of the cloud. All of this energy use, all of this greenhouse gas emission means that countries are actually not able to reach their climate goals under the Paris Agreement. And in a lot of places, actually, the whole electricity grid capacity has been reached, which also means energy transition from fossil fuels to green energy is on hold because the electricity grids are just completely clogged up. Some examples, in case anybody's here from Frankfurt, maybe. Frankfurt is the 20th biggest concentration of data centers in the world. If you want to build a small bakery, like a small industrial bakery or a recycling factory, somewhere around Frankfurt, you have to wait until 2030 to get an electricity connection on the grid because the capacity has run out. In Amsterdam, there's about 30,000 houses that can't be built. There's schools that can't be renovated. And the city says, we would like to move our vehicles from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, but we can't because we can't get charging points. And Berlin has a lot of land speculation now for future data centers. So these are all effects that are happening in this idea of we need to build data centers to be able to process all the data that comes with AI. And of course, once you you probably have seen this picture. That's Meta's proposal for a data center that is about the size of Manhattan, just for the scale that we're thinking about. And of course, once data centers are running, they also have local effects. In Spain, especially in the region of Aragon, you have a lot of water diversions. You already had that for industrial use, but that has increased a lot. So the water basically goes directly from the river into the cloud. These infrared pictures you might have seen, they are from XAI's data centers in Memphis and Mississippi. That's gas turbines that are used for cooling. That's producing nitrogen oxygen, which is a smog-producing gas, very unhealthy to breathe in. And these data centers are run either without permits or with permits that were given much later, simply because Elon Musk had announced that Grok would be up and running within a year, and they wouldn't have time to even ask for an environmental permit. And then they built a data center like that directly next to an already disadvantaged poor black neighborhood that are now fighting to get summer clean air. So in this case, moving fast and breaking things means moving fast and breaking people's healths. And this is not just happening in the US. This is a model, a picture from the data center FR7 in Frankfurt. When that was built, the first phase, it was heralded as this amazing leading data center in sustainability. And then they decided to actually build it bigger and now say, well, we have more land than we have power access. As in, we can't actually connect all of that to the electricity grid, so we're going to use gas turbines. I suppose the German environmental rules are better than the US ones, but nonetheless, that is a huge data center running on fossil fuels. And then we come to the whole supply chain to actually building and running data centers, because that's pretty fragile. In the geopolitical climate that we have at the moment, energy and gas prices are very, very much changing. I started writing this talk before the US and Israel started bombing Lebanon and Iran, and since then the electricity prices have been all over the place. But also other resources are a problem in this supply chain, and that's where the helium comes back in again. Helium is used mainly in medical devices, but is also required for cooling down the wafers for chip production. You want them really cool and really clean to actually get everything working. That's a byproduct of gas production, and there's about 4 or 5 places in the world where that is coming from. And 30% of all helium that is required to build chips for data centers is coming from Qatar. And it needs to be shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. I suppose you can see the problem there, because at the moment it's not moving. At the moment it's actually leaking out of the containers because you can't get containers sealed off enough to stop helium leaking out. And this picture is the Ras Laffan facility, where helium is then actually processed to be put into these containers. Well, that got bombed 3 weeks ago. So now the production is on hold. So a lot of chip production was relying on that. So as I said, that's a fragile supply chain we have actually here. So data centers are basically a twin extractive industry. It needs the extraction of raw materials to build and run the physical spaces, to then extract the data with all the crawling AI bots that consume material that is online, with all the copyright violations and what have you connected to it. Often they are announced as really powerful by saying, this is consuming so much energy, that's going to make so much data. But once they're actually built, very little of that information is given. In some cases, that's not really surprising. Elon Musk and Sam Altman are not the kind of people that will happily give you information that could damage their business model. But also other companies like Amazon or Microsoft are actually trying to hide how much water they're actually using. For example, by kind of classifying it in different parts in their reporting or by giving incomplete data. Microsoft in 2021, when they wanted to build a data center in the Netherlands, simply said, well, our existing one's using 20 million liters of water annually. Until somebody figured out a few weeks later that was 80 million liters of water, just the way they had done the accounting. And it's not just a few bad apples, actually. In the EU, there's an obligation for data centers to report on their annual water and electricity use. Now, for 2025, 36% of data centers actually reported anything. So that's only a third of the data centers that even bothered to fulfill their obligation there. And out of that, only 60% actually said how much water they used. Others just handed in empty Excel sheets and says, confidential business information. So in the EU, we have reports of a quarter of the data centers on how much water they're using. Now that omission is a strategy, because it is much more difficult to go and say, we don't want this here, or we don't want this factory or this data center to be built here because it's using this and that. By just not giving us that information, it's influencing the political decision-making around it. But then don't let that lack of hard data actually fool us. We know that there are environmental effects. We know that they're global as well as local. And these effects mean that local residents who want to breathe clean air, children that don't want to sit in crumbling school buildings, they are pitched against global corporations. These environmental effects are externalities that we have to take into account, just as we have to take the environmental effects of other decisions that we take in our life and our work. We have to think about them. And as a tech community, we have talked about sustainability before. We need to continue doing that. Because when you use AI, it's not just a cloud somewhere. It is real people that are getting affected. And of course, there's an economic dimension to that as well. A growing number of articles published by financial institutions are not talking about if the AI bubble bursts, but when it will do that. There's a lot of circular funding agreements around, like data centers being built on debt, secured against future profits. And then the question is, when will they be profitable? At the moment, only NVIDIA, the chip manufacturer, is actually making profit. What we see now with lots of companies is that they will need to become profitable sooner rather than later. That means tokens will need to go for much higher subscription prices, for example. And at the same time, companies like OpenAI have actually said they're going to reduce their spending from 1.4 trillion to 600 billion by 2030. And the first services are actually getting closed. Microsoft is complaining that people use AI mainly for entertainment, but not for serious business. And when we had the dot-com bubble crash in 2000, that was actually because of a lack of demand for all of that startups trying to go public at the same time. And then the financial crash in the 2010s was based on because there were a lot of unsecured debt. now the assumption is we could actually end up with a mix of both. And that will be payback time for venture funding. That will hurt everybody who's investing in AI, but also those who's using it by increased costs for running the services. It will also affect, actually, down the line, much more different companies, including the local builders that are actually building these data centers. We already see an increase in prices. We will see an increase in prices in subscriptions for the LLM modules. But we also see, since OpenAI secured about 40% of the global chip production, we see the price of consumer electronics going up. We see the price of hosting going up. Anybody who's hosting on Hertz now will have seen their price going up by 30% now. And that was, as the reason they gave, is because the DRM prices had gone up by 500% for them since September 2025. But on that very cheery note, let's just take a step back and have a quick recap on what actually is AI. Well, the term has been around since 1955, but without any proper definition. At that point, it was a research proposal to say, let's just look at AI for 2 months and then we're going to be done. I found this table online, which actually from 2021 said, we have 3D modeling, we have automated translation, we have chatbots, supply chain optimization, automation, data mining, and now all of that is called AI. There's a few more things, and especially once they're combined, but it's a very clever marketing, because I think John also mentioned that in his talk earlier. By calling all of that AI, it becomes difficult for people to see the differences. But if we want to take decisions, what tools are we using for what and for what goal, then we need to be clear. And we need to say whether we talk about an AI for 3D modeling, that means when you have a knee operation, the hole doesn't go too deep, or whether you want to generate a video on the fly. So if we're clear about our language, it will be clearer for us to take decisions. And how are people working with AI? Let's move to that. Well, first of all, working conditions in mines and in chip factories can be very, very grim. But let's talk about data workers, and this is where my content warning needs to come in. The World Bank estimates that there's about 154 to 435 million data workers worldwide, either full-time or part-time, because generative AI needs a lot of material to be trained on. So that's, on the one hand, the AI bots that crawl our websites, our Git repos, to extract text and consume it into the model as training. But for image, that's a bit more complex, because that requires turning images or parts of images into text that can be consumed. So we all know like how a US school bus looks by now, I think. But there's much more images around that we don't get to see. And that's where the data workers come in. Data workers spend hours on end labeling microimages, so for $2 an hour, so that the correct part of the image is used for the training. That little bicycle that might be in the background is tagged as bicycle, and because an image usually has lots of bits and pieces in it, and you need to know which one the module actually should be trained on. But these data workers are also used for content moderation. So that means data workers read the transphobic rants, they read the death threats, they read the rape fantasies, they see all the uploaded image of graphical violence. And content moderation used to be just saying yes or no, this is okay for this platform or not. 60 seconds per image, hours long per day, that's already traumatizing, especially when there's no support and you're not allowed to talk about your work. But with generative AI, that has become much more worse, because now the data workers need to train the AI on the relevant part of the image to label everything. So they need to label every bruise, every injury, they need to measure the blade that was used for a beheading. That information only came about when about 140 data workers that were contracted by Meta for dealing with sexual content, they got diagnosed with PTSD. They're currently taking Meta to court and that court decision hasn't been reached yet. But we need to remember that when we use image generation, it does require people training the AI in digital sweatshops. But closer to home, let's talk about writing code, building websites, applications. I think we have to assume that somehow all of us will have to work AI or with the output of AI in one way or the other. And the intention of any form of automation has always been to de-skill jobs, to cut costs. So to replace skilled staff by unskilled one, to provide, to create gig economies where it's easy to find more or less workers depending on how well you're doing. So that's a further commodification of human labor that we have here. Just an example, in Germany, voice actors are currently on strike because Netflix has decided to change their contract so that Netflix has the right to use their voice to train the AI that will replace them in a year or two. We have also seen quite a few sessions at Drupal events about reducing the number of people that are involved, for example, in publishing an article, or being able to cut out the graphic designer by generating an image on the fly. And at the same time, we have talks about don't replace your staff, but enhance the output with AI. I'm starting to wonder if there's a conference about graphic designers that talk about we need to enhance our output, maybe get rid of all the people that make the websites using the things. But there's this weird thing. On the one hand, we say we don't want so many people, but we want our jobs. In the end, it will be each company, each organization that will have to decide which skills, which experiences are important for them, for us. And in lots of cases, we have to hope that that won't be our job that's cut out. But let's assume that you keep your job. Well, let's talk about the famous human in the loop, the person that's supposed to check the AI output or the AI babysitter. Can that actually work? I've got an example from that people that were at the Drupal Camp England should recognize. It was a keynote that was also about not firing his staff, about using AI to enhance their output, to amplify their work. And the speaker wanted to illustrate that with a very simple picture, with a little stool with 3 legs, with a word written on each leg. And he used AI to generate that image. And he got a picture with a chair with 4 legs. He couldn't change it. He used it anyway in his presentation. To be fair, I don't think he had fired an in-house designer, because that's not my point. My point is that in this case, this speaker was the human in the loop. He knew what he wanted, he saw that the output didn't work, and he couldn't do anything about it. Yesterday, or on the first day of Dev Days, the example of pilots flying with autopilot came up as an example of a human in the loop. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, because pilots use actually 2 different systems, the autopilot, which they can turn on and off, and a system called fly-by-wire, which makes the plane kind of anticipate what the pilot wants to do, so that when you use the joystick, it's doing much smoother movements, rather than you making the plane go all over the place. The pilots cannot turn that off. The system can turn itself off if it thinks it's outside the parameters and it can't figure out anymore what the pilot wants to do. Now, in 2009, a flight from Buenos Aires to Paris just crashed into the sea because the co-pilots had made some errors. The fly-by-wire system cut out. They didn't know what to do about it. They couldn't understand the error messages. They couldn't understand the information they saw on the screens, even though the information was completely correct. My point here is that if the human in the loop doesn't have the skills, the time, the resources, if they are not in control of the tool, then they're not a human in the loop. So if we want to rely on that, we have to make sure that everybody who you consider doing that actually is able to take over the job. And what does it mean if you use AI just to assist you? Well, on the short term, there's probably some benefits. If you use it one-off because you don't have time to do something, that probably works. Actually, in a few examples we've heard, kind of are usually prefixed with the, I can do it, but I never had the time to do that. Or, I don't have the time to learn this new language, but I could. But if I use AI, I can see that it works. But what if AI assistant becomes part of your daily work? If you're mandated by your bosses to do that? Skills famously decline when you not use them. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and there's some scientific studies. And this is probably the first Deaf Days where we not quote the Lancet once but twice. Because yes, there has been a recent study about doctors doing colonoscopy, so a camera in your gut where you then see, is this polyp cancerous or not? And a study looked at the detection rate that experienced medical staff had in doing that, 3 months before adding AI assistance and 3 months afterwards. Within 3 months of using AI assistance, the detection rate, the skill of the medical staff with decades of experience was declining significantly for a scientific study. And actually, the detection rate compared to experienced medical staff was the same. So it's not even that with AI assistance, more cancer was found. A doctor with 10 years experience had the same detection rate as the AI assistant. So we have to assume that will be the same for other tasks, for other skills that we have. In addition to that, AI-generated code will create cognitive debt, as in, if you need to catch up on what the code is doing, you're catching up. You kind of have to figure out what it has done after it has written the code, not while you're writing it. And in generally, we are learning by doing. We're not learning by looking over somebody's shoulder. You're not learning how to write PHP by looking at Drupal as it is currently written. And if we talk about using AI to increase our output, to increase the output of an experienced developer, then the question is still, where do you get that experience from? Christian did a talk on the first day. I highly recommend to look at that recording when it's up, because that question, where do we get the junior developers from, where do we get the experience from, that will come back to us in the next years. But generative AI and AI agents are not only a tool for developers and content creators, LLMs are used now also to guide decision-making. Now keep in mind that an LLM basically only provides a reflection, not an innovation, because the output of LLMs is based on probability, on the stochastics that are taken from all the information that is consumed beforehand. So the output is basically flattening against the statistic average. That's fine if you look for hard facts, but it can also be quite severe if you get an inherent bias that comes in. I have another scientific study here from the London School of Economics that was done because, to quote them, LLMs perpetuate gender stereotypes in machine translation, in hiring recommendations, in occupational rankings, for example. So in this study, they took short patient notes and then asked the state-of-the-art AI at that point to summarize them and make recommendations. So they used the same text, only changed the name and the gender of the person. So you have one text about Mr. John Smith and one text about Miss Jane Smith. And then they got different results. So Mr. Smith has a complex medical history and requires significant nursing support. While for Mrs. Jane Smith, we have, despite her diagnosis and physical limitations, Miss Smith's physical and mental health remain unchanged. That's the same patient note. One person will get support, the other doesn't. in a very gendered way. So why did they do that study? Well, not because they thought, health professionals are lazy, but because it's an understaffed service and the staff has been told by the bosses, by the policy makers, to use AI. You might have seen that in other budgets, that it suddenly says, and then spend money on AI. We don't know for what, but use it. So in the medical profession, we have actually learned how to deal with these biases very consciously, because it is affecting real people's lives. We have to have that understanding about inherent bias in a lot of different places as well. And I think Node wrote a blog post a few months ago trying to use Claude Code for assigning issue credits, and found that it was really hard because the system was continuously only giving credits to people who had written code, not to all the other things that we as a Drupal community in our guidelines say you should be credited for that. Now that's a case probably because the average of what the LLM finds out there is different than our values of Drupal. So we have to fight against these systems at certain places. I've got a note that I should drink some water in between. So, as I said, each company, each agency, each organization, they will decide which skills are relevant, which are not for their business module. But that's not something that's happening automatically. It's not inevitable. It's not something that can only go one way. So you have to ask yourself, how do you want to run your agency, your team? Which tasks do you want to replace? Is that something where you decide that your task can be replaced? Or is it somebody else deciding that their task can be replaced? And we need to think about that when we give advice to our clients. When we develop functionality for them, we have to see how does it impact their workflows, their staff. To which degree do they need to rely on external services, on costs that can't be predicted at the moment? But also, what impact does it have if you build them a system with AI? What impact does it have on their reputation? Because if you're an environmental NGO, if you're a business that is selling tools to mitigate climate change effects, then you can be very easily dismissed as really hypocritical if you rely on the constant resource extraction and the high energy use of data centers. So we need to be honest with our clients about the externalities of AI. But coming even closer to Drupal now, and let's assume there's no slop anymore. Let's assume all code that is written is kind of technically perfect. Still the question is, how does using AI affect us as an open source community? There's a few areas where I think we feel restricted, where things are slowing us down. That's like reviewing, that's like the lack of time in general, the lack of contributing back, or how to involve new contributors. So let me talk a bit about those issues. Contributing back is an ongoing pain point, I think. That's companies, agencies building their business on Drupal, but not contributing any code or anything else into the community. Contributing it does require time. That's usually not billable, or that's simply not available. So local workarounds, new features might not end up in a patch or a contrib module, because that also needs an ongoing maintenance, for example. And if we use AI to generate code, does this client code that works for that project, that goes out of the door, if that is developed without any deeper understanding of the developer putting it there, then it becomes even harder to contribute back. So we might see less contribution from companies that use AI a lot to generate code. Or it could go the other way. Because if it's much easier to turn something into a module, into a contrib module, then maybe we end up with lots of messages in the contrib channel on Slack that says, hey, I made a new module. We might end up with a lot of snowflake modules that are unmaintained, but that look really good in your profile list. And of course, we need reviewing. I think that got mentioned a few times, because reviewing needs expertise and it needs time. So maybe, ideally, we would have a contributor that's using AI assistance, that generates clean, beautiful code, that solves exactly what is written in the issue description, nothing else. Well, then maybe reviewing would just be a breeze to say, yeah, perfect, that fits with what we want. But we still actually need, nonetheless, discuss the issues. We need to discuss what we really want. Maybe then we can actually move things along faster. Maybe for some contributors that will be better merge requests, if they use generated code but really go through it, understand it, cut out everything that isn't actually required, then maybe that works. But we will also have the people that just run their AI agents across the whole issue queue, create some hit and miss code without understanding the code or the architecture or the thought behind it. And even if only some of their merge requests are getting merged, there's nothing really lost to them besides a handful of tokens. And they might actually even feel truly helpful to the community. Or maybe they're just after issue credits for them or for their company. And nonetheless, even if our code would be beautiful, we do need reviewers. We need the time for that, we need the expertise. Otherwise, we're just creating an overwhelming queue of work in addition to what we already have. And I think as a community, it is our responsibility not to burn out each other. And then, of course, lots of merge requests do need extra work. And then comes the question, what resources can we actually give to new contributors? Stack Overflow has been completely declined. Writing blog posts has become pointless because it doesn't drive web traffic to your website anymore anyway. Documentation is a pretty thankless task. So when we get a merge request and we need to deal with that, how do we know how that was written? Or is that question even relevant? Or is it more relevant to understand where the contributor is coming from? I went to FOSDEM in January, where somebody spent about half an hour just talking about the question how to decide whether to put any empathy in replying to a pull request. Now, most open source systems have more something where you just make a pull request kind of out of the blue quite often. Within Drupal, we are in a much better position because we have that community and that workflow where we write an issue, and that might end up with a very long discussion in the issue queue before we actually get to usable code. But the question still remains, how do we know whether somebody is a genuine new contributor who just needs a bit more mentoring and some friendly review to learn and to stick around, or whether you, as a reviewer, are just feeding their prompt? Keep in mind that the assumption of somebody's understanding of code is gendered. There's a study from 2016. The same code is seen different depending on whether the nick is perceived as male or female. That hasn't changed. Actually, the idea now also is that if a woman uses an AI, that's because she doesn't know it. If a man using AI, it's because they're enhancing the experience. So again, inherent bias that we need to deal with. So the answer to merge requests written by AI might not be the code is always better and sloppy, or the AI is always writing great code. The decision we have to take is how we want to help each other along on the way. That's a social question, not a technical one. But as a community, we need to find a way to stay welcoming to new contributors. So, and I'm coming to my last slides now. So AI tools, generative AI agents, they're not innovation, but reflection. And innovation doesn't actually happen in isolation. It happens in collaboration. It happens when different experiences are bouncing off each other. When we have technical expertise, when we have people that remember why a certain decision was taken in the past, when we have somebody with expertise in accessibility, when other people know how end users are actually going to use the software, or when different people have different ideas how to address an UX problem. Requirements might even contradict each other, but as a community, we talk to each other, we decide on these directions. And that's how I think how we build a great software and a great tool. So it's our responsibility as a tool to see how are we going on, how are we continue working collaboratively, which tools to use, which guardrails to put in place to say, should you be transparent or not, or all of these kind of things. But what we can't do is steamroll one approach through or block another approach simply by saying nothing will, this is inevitable. This is a horrible word. This will happen anyway. We have to talk about these things. So we need to talk about what tools do we want. When it comes to AI, we need to continue talking about externalities, environmental effects, sustainability. We have done that before. We need to continue doing that. We are not at the luxury to say, I'm not concerned about energy use. We have to think about what costs are worth the gain, who's paying for the use of AI, with their money, with their health. Are we participating in extraction and exploitation? How do you want to work with your colleagues? Which skills do we value? Those that make organizations and communities resilient, or those that create quick outputs? Do we want to contribute to de-skilling and gig economies in our own industry? Do we want to use proprietary tools to create open source software? So that answer is up to you. That answer is up to us as a community. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. It was wonderful to see these issues being opened up in the public again. My question is this: is there any way, us as a community of developers, to make any impactful push towards attaining these social and ecological goals without taking the political or even the activist route?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the last bit.
Is there any way for us to make any impactful change without taking the political or the activist route?
I think everything we do is actually political. Like the choice that we do for creating open source, that is a political decision. So I don't think there's any problem with being political. You are making an impact if you are running an agency and you decide what tools you think you want to be using or what advice you give to your clients. That might look that it's a small part, but I think collective actions generally come from also organizations, individuals taking decisions. So I think it's political no matter what you're doing.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you.
It's very blinding here.
That is a very long walk to bring the mic. Thank you. My main question that pops up in my head, because these questions, I see them pass by, several people are asking them, how can we find a balance and not get left behind if everyone else is using AI and accelerating things? How do we find that balance and using it in an ethical way, making sure that we still keep humans as the smart people that we are, without being left?
I'm not sure whether the kind of whole industry will need to go all the same way. Like we have factories that make bread, and we have artisanal bakeries. Maybe there's a market for artisanal artisanal agencies. And for the rest, I think trying to find out in your own workflow, where does it make sense to to use generation of code, for example, without losing your own skills. I think that's a place to look at. Also, I think what John mentioned earlier today, avoid situations where people feel they have become addicted to the tool and the rewards it's giving. And I think we have been at different points in time when we thought, okay, this is never going to change. If anybody has been to Amsterdam in the 1980s, the whole city was full of cars. The place behind the Rijksmuseum was one huge car park. And now it's a place where you can cycle. So change can happen, but that's where you have to look at what tools are you using in which way. Do you want to have junior developers in your company or not, for example? Find a way of teaching them before they use the tools to replace part of their work. If that
Thank
helps.
you. Yeah, makes sense.
There's a question behind you there.
Thank you. I just need to add something to the previous question. So I recommend my team to use one day without AI. So I mean, for junior, especially for junior developers. I mean, we are using AI a lot, Claude and ChatGPT and others LLMs, but I recommend, my team and to use one day non-AI. All the day with all the stuff with the search in Google and with the Stack Overflow, with the Drupal Exchange, and all these things. I mean, to not losing the mind, because if you are counting a lot on the AI, this is painful in the future. Thank you.
So I really appreciated your chart on all of the things that used to be called specific what they are and are now just AI. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think that for some of us, for those of us who have been exposed to a lot of the downsides of developers using AI, we have just like a wholesale negative reaction. But something I've been thinking about is that I think we need to be selective and pick the ways to use it that enhance what we're trying to build. So there's a difference between a developer using an agent to talk to an agent to write code, right? There's a difference between that and providing a natural language user interface for site building, right? The former is, I have very complicated feelings about, but the second, that's a huge usability improvement. There's no way not to say that providing a human language interface for site building isn't an improvement for Drupal. The problem is, of course, making sure that what gets built is secure, correct, et cetera, and so there's the risk of loss of skills there. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that second category of things, where it's not us using it in our workflows, but providing it as a tool to the audiences of Drupal for things like, site building, like speech-to-text recognition, that kind of thing that enhances the lives of enhances interactions of people, that provides accessibility impacts for people with disabilities who are trying to interact with these tools.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, for example, I can see a really good use for AI with the tool that Chicken, like the agency of Justine and forgot his name in the UK, just built. They built an AI module that is extracting information in a structured way out of a PDF and turns that into pages in your website. Now that's an accessibility improvement that is fixing something that's inherently broken. That's PDFs on website. But it also means that system only needs to do that once per PDF. It is replacing something where somebody would spend hours in copy-pasting the bits out of the PDF into a page. So that can be done once, and then the information is accessible. That's very different than, for example, providing an LLM chatbot that would try to pull out that information because the PDF isn't readable for somebody. So I think tools that provide transcription, tools that can be a bit more fuzzy in the search, those things are useful. But I've also seen the example of saying, our search is really broken. Let's use LLM instead, rather than fixing the search. So, and that's why I think it's good if we actually name correctly what we want to do. So yeah, thank you for that question. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll be around and drink coffee. Thank you.